disclosure particularly, and the flip side of the other side of the coin is UPSI. So that is in making. This is delivered. UPSI PIT regulations, as we all know, is also expected to undergo change. LODR amendment has already happened. Saurabh is very deeply merged himself into this subject for last several years, and I'm sure everybody will like this discussion. As we know, SEBI LODR regulations have emerged, have got amended because of many pronouncements. For example, NSE matter that gave rise to changes related to senior management, or like SEBI said in its concept paper, various press releases issued by many listed companies, but whether it is treated as material information, whether it is treated as UPSI, what is UPSI? That subjectivity around that UPSI and materiality, probably regulator wants to settle down, and therefore this major change has happened. And lot of actionables for compliance department, and this LODR is going beyond the domain or beyond the HO or corporate office of any company. It is getting more and more democratized, and more stakeholders will have to get engaged, involved, roped in, and made responsible. And therefore, a lot of actionables. This will give rise to probably compliance budget of every company. More and more young company secretaries, senior company secretaries will get many more opportunities to serve either on a practicing side or on the corporate side. More of corporate side, the role of company secretary towards stakeholder engagement is going to increase. Investor engagement, stakeholder engagement, internal and external stakeholder engagement is going to increase, and it will keep on increasing, is what this LODR amendment is again loudly telling us. I'm happy that all of you are gathered here, and Saurabh will take us through very fine points and the takeaways, whatever we have to share. Thanks, Saurabh. Over to you, Yashika and Aarti.
Thank you so much, Makran sir, to give your insights about these amendments. I would request Aarti ma'am to take it over and introduce Mr. Saurabh Agarwal.
Good evening, everyone. Apologies for the technical glitch. To start with the session, I would give a brief of Saurabh Agarwal. He's a fellow member of ICSI with an experience of more than 13 years. He overviews the listed advisory function of MMJC and has been conducting various sessions for clients of MMJC on the SEBI matters and PIT matters. He is a member of task force. He is also a core member of Capital Market Committee. He has also assisted Dr. KRC Chandrate in writing book on secretarial audit. MMJC also has an experience of more than 2 decades and have been serving 1,000 plus companies. MMJC also has a mobile app on Companies Act, which has download of more than 2 lakhs. Saurabh has delivered various lectures at study circle, seminar organized by ICSI. Recently, he has been personally instrumental in framing various policies, SOPs for compliance of Regulation 30 and PIT. So I would request Saurabh to take forward the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you, Yashika, and thank you, Makran sir, for your kind words of wisdom. Is my screen visible, Aarti?
Yes, very much, Saurabh.
I think so. Given the delay, let's start directly with the subject. Intricacies of LODR second amendment. This is LODR second amendment. I read somewhere that this is SEBI's way of proactively trying to fill the identified gaps. So as even Makran sir was highlighting, that there have been some cases which SEBI has identified, and in order to spread those numbers, in order to avoid to spread those numbers, SEBI has come out with this amendment. There are a lot of literatures already available in public domain. Let's start with the key aspects. These are some important dates to begin with. First of which is 14 June 2023, when this amendment came into play, wherein already four of the subjects have already been effectuated. High value debt companies, for comply and explain basis, their timeline has been extended. BRSR core has been introduced. BRSR core assurance for value chain has also been introduced, but we are awaiting circulars. 37A, which talks about sale, lease, or otherwise dispose of undertaking, that also has been effectuated already. And regulation 57, which is again for debt listed companies, which is about various intimations in the relation to the payment of principal and interest. So these regulations are already effective, and we will have to already take care of these regulations. Second important date is 14 July 2023, wherein majority, if not all, pending regulations are made effective. We will go through the fine points of these regulations in the upcoming slides. Another important date is 12th August 2023, which is 30 days from the day when these regulations are being effectuated, within which, on or before which, you will have to, all listed companies will have to make disclosures to stock exchange about whatever material event or information is not yet disclosed to public, that has to be disclosed by 12th August 2023. This is confined to para B items. What are the implications? What are the fine points? That is something which we will be observing in next 1 hour or so. My submission to all my friends here is, please feel free to pose your questions in the Q&A box. In next 60 odd minutes, I will be just sharing my experience on this subject, fine points, and then happy to take as many questions you would like to pose. Moving on, the core or the soul of this regulation, which has stormed the entire industry, is these amendments to Regulation 30, wherein for the first time SEBI has expressly mandated and specified the quantitative factors. As we know, in quick terms, I term it as 2-5. So 2% of console turnover, 2% of net worth, and 5% of absolute value, average of the absolute value of P&L, whichever is lower. So for example, if a company has a turnover of 1,000 crores, 2% of 1,000 crores will become 20 crores, and assuming 10% profitability, the profit at PAT level will be, say, 100 crores, and assuming that's the average, so 5% of 100 crores will be 5 crores. And there is 2% of net worth, assuming that this net worth is not below 5 crores. So the threshold for such companies would be 5 crores for a size of 1,000 crore top line and 100 crores of PAT. The threshold will be 5 crores for para B items. Our experience has been that predominantly for most of the companies, this is what the number boils down to, which is average absolute value of PAT 5%. There is one question which often comes to our desk, which is, what is this absolute value? In simple arithmetic term, it is anything which is negative should be classified as positive. So for an example, if in year 1 there is a loss of 200 crores, in year 2 there is a loss of 200 crores, and in year 3 there is a profit of, say, 300 crores. So minus 200 plus minus 200 plus minus 100 plus 300, the answer will be 0. And practically every single rupee transaction coming under para B would warrant disclosure. To address this kind of an issue, SEBI has come out with this concept of absolute value, wherein their submission is that instead of considering that negative number should be considered as a positive number. So it will be minus 200, minus 100 will become plus. So 200 plus 100 plus 300. that will be 600 divided by 3. 200 crores will become the average number, and that 200 should be the basis which the disclosures will have to be made. The idea behind this concept of absolute value was also to understand or to factor in an important critical factor, which is the size of the company in which it is playing. So 200, 100, 300, 0 would be something which would be completely out of the box and may not be warranted, and therefore they are coming out with this absolute value concept. Moving ahead, given the fact that these parameters are for only para B items, there is a question which comes to our mind, that is there still a need for identification of or carving out of materiality parameters or quantitative thresholds for that matter. So if we observe, there is regulation 30 subregulation 9, which talks about events or informations with respect to subsidiaries which are material for the listed entity. And also there is a regulation 30 subregulation 12, which talks about event or information which is not falling under para A, para B, but which is material for the listed entity. So question is here, friends, that what should be considered as material, what should not be considered as what should considered as material and what should considered as not material, especially given the light that there is a quantitative factor which has been specified by SEBI, which is on a console basis. In other words, suppose for a para B item, if 5 crores is my threshold for for materiality, can there be a different number for events or information with respect to subsidiary, or event or information which is not coming in para B? Given this background, our submission is that companies would have to come out with a materiality policy, or there would be an internal framework wherein there should be a quantitative factor which has to be crafted, which based on our research, our submission should not be more than the threshold which is being specified under regulation 30. The reason the reason behind this is that if for any reason SEBI says that this is material, we would need to have a rationale as to why we are saying that this item is not material in nature. Therefore, if there is any company who has not crafted materiality or quantitative thresholds for these sub-regulations, then they are on the mercy of the point in time as to how it will get concluded. Moving ahead, another pain point which has come for many listed companies is the revision in the timelines of disclosure. As we observe, as we know that, friends, now SEBI has said that anything which requires board approval will require disclosure within 30 minutes of the conclusion of the board meeting. Any event or information which is emanating internally within the organization, that has to be disclosed within 12 hours. And any event or information which is emanating outside, that has to be disclosed within 24 hours of that particular event or information taken into place. If we look into isolation, these timelines seem to be very clear, very absolute. However, when we try to put these timelines into this particular para A, para B items, that's where the whole game starts. If we observe the first point, this is part A, para A, point 1, which talks about acquisition or sale or disposal of any unit, acquisition, scheme of arrangement, sale or disposal of any unit or division or whole or substantial part of the undertaking. Usually, these kind of transactions are taken place after the board has given their blessings. There is another school of thought wherein the definitive agreement is not yet signed. Earlier, many companies used to practice that after the board has given their record, within 24 hours, they used to get the definitive agreements also signed. And therefore, the disclosure used to happen after the board meeting and after the signing of the definitive agreement. However, now it would be not practical to execute these agreements within 30 minutes of the conclusion of the board meeting. And therefore, a question would be, should we disclose at the time when the board has given their record, immediately after conclusion of board meeting, or should we disclose after the definitive agreement has been executed? Friends, there was a circular in 2015, which September 2015, which specifies the minimum items or minimum information which has to be disclosed when we are making a disclosure under this schedule. In that, there was a part B which used to give us guidance as to when the disclosure has to be made. The guidance was in the frame that if any particular event or information required board's approval, that has to be declared immediately after the conclusion of board meeting. If it requires shareholders' approval as well, then the disclosure has to be given by board at the time of board approval as well as at the time of shareholder approval. And there was a third classification that if nothing is required, if board or shareholder approval is not required, if it is emanating without any such scenario, then within 24 hours of that event or information coming into being. As per the board note available, the SEBI is in the making of something called a continuous disclosure requirement circular. And therefore, we believe that clarification into this aspect will be provided in that particular circular. In absence of that circular, the disclosures would be required to be given within 30 minutes of the completion of board meeting, as well as after the definitive agreement is being signed. There would be one more disclosure which will be warranted, because as per again 30 sub-regulation 4, wherein there is a material development, we have to disclose to public at large. So when the transaction gets completed, the disclosures will have to be made at that point in time as well. So to summarize, for one event, there would be an occasion wherein the disclosures would be required to be made not only once, twice, but even thrice for that matter. There are more such examples wherein if it is pertaining to issuance of securities, consolidation, board approval, there is no confusion there. Receipt of new rating or revision rating 24 hours, because it is emanating outside the entity. Point number 4 is with respect to outcome of board meeting, which is very clear, needs no further clarification. Some more confusing points. There is point number 5, which talks about agreements which are family settlement agreements, which impacts management control, or which are binding and not in normal course of business. Question is, would these kind of agreements be emanating within or outside the listed company? So wherever the listed entity is a party to that agreement, say for example any engagement with media houses, okay, which are binding on the listed entity, which the listed entity enters, then 12 hours timeline will be required to be adhered. But where the shareholders agreement, where the shareholders or the promoters of the company have entered into such kind of agreements, which is going to impact management control, that would probably be required to be disclosed within 24 hours, because the said entity is not a party. There is another kind of ambiguity here as well, wherein wherein part A, para A expects us that wherever there is a fraud or default by promoter or director or KMP, which is going to impact the listed company, we will have to make disclosure. First question would be whether it is emanating within or whether emanating outside. Since it is a fraud or a default relating to the promoter, director, KMP, where listed entity is not a party, one might take a view that it is emanating outside, and therefore 24 hours would be required if we can make a disclosure within 24 hours. Where the default is being done by the listed entity, the timeline will get confined to 12 hours. However, $1 million question would be that these 12 hours or 24 hours from when? Especially when there is a whistle which is blown in the for promoter, director, or KMP or SMP. Okay. So the company will have to assess whether actually there is any fraud or default or not from these personnel, and then make this particular disclosure. Giving any premature disclosure would again create a lot of chaos. So this clarity also needs to be provided. In case of change in director SMP, again, since listed entity, suppose our entity resigns, listed entity is not aware about it, and therefore one school of thought is that this is being emanating outside the listed entity. So therefore, a 24-hour sticker would be will be applicable. However, if there is any promotion, demotion, or an appointment of a particular KMP SMB, since listed entity is a part, it has to be done in 12 hours. Friends, there are many, I can go on and on for each point, but that's not the message which we want to pass. The message here is that there is a lot of confusion, a lot of clarity which is required. We all will have to apply ourselves and see that for which item, when the disclosures has to be made. And therefore, given that these timelines are very strict, 30 minutes, 12 hours, 24 hours, we would not want to wait for that event to come up and then deliberate whether it is 30 minutes, 12 hours, 24 hours, or whether from what occasion this disclosure has to be made. So all of us will have to do some exercise, we will have to do some homework and provide clarity not only probably in the policy, but also internally with all relevant employees, because ultimately they will be passing on this information. Moving ahead, assistance for employees. So there is a new concept. Even Makran sir in his opening remarks, he highlighted that now the regulator has expressly in black and white, they have democratized the process of flagging of the information by relevant employees. So if we see the language of the law, it says that the policy should assist relevant employees to identify potential material event or information and report it to the KMP for further processing. The idea behind this, as per SEBI board papers, is that since these informations take a lot of time to go to the public, therefore it is really important to have this process in place. And given that this is a digital era, this information should be flowing out very, very swiftly. Now, with this background, how as an employee, we all are company secretaries, so we understand this subject. Even we know for a fact that entire organization feels that this is our responsibility, and therefore there is very limited to no cooperation from other departments. So what should we do in the policy that would help or that would assist these employees who are not coming from secretarial background to help to flag off all these material event or information? Our submission is that if I would have been an employee or if I would have been in a legal department, first thing which I would have expected is that for out of this laundry list of para A, para B items, for which item am I responsible to flag off this information, or primarily responsible to flag off this information? So against each para A, para B item, I would have, in the policy, I would have expected that which departments are responsible. Thereafter, who are these relevant employees? Is it only the core management, top 2 people, or is it the entire finance team or the entire legal team who should be made responsible? A clarity in this respect should also be provided, either in the form of a policy or in the form of an internal document. That's how I as an employee would have a clear message, and my focus will be, you would have my focus in helping the KMPs in giving this disclosure. Moving ahead, the method of reporting. Will it be physical? Will it be electronic? Or will it be overall like a phone a friend? Our submission again is that we should avoid having a facility of intimating such material, event, or information over a phone call. This might look very comfortable, very easy to do, but may lead to friction later on, especially when some employees would have not flagged off information. If there is no paper trail, there can be a confusion, a chaos as to employees would say that we have flagged off. Compliance officer or secretary team would say that we never got information about it. So an express mention in this regard is something which we firmly suggest. Third aspect would be format of reporting. As a compliance officer or as a KMP, when I have to make a conclusion that whether this is material information or not, I would generally expect A, B, C, D, E kind of an information which would come to my desk. For example, what's the background of this particular event or information? Whether the relevant employee feels that this is material. If yes, then what is the working which they have done? If they can share that with us. What is the source of that particular information? All such things, all such basic items should ideally be forming part of this format, which when filled will make compliance officers or KMP's life easy to make these particular decisions. Last but not the least, when the reporting has to be done, we know that there is this 30, 12, 24-hour ticker, and therefore it will be imperative that this information doesn't come to us at 29th minute or 11th hour or 23rd hour, because again, as a company, if there is a delay in making this disclosure, we will have to flag off the reason why we couldn't make this disclosure on time. Even if we miss, stock exchanges usually make a point that they write back to you and they ask you that why you have not made this information or made this information public within the specified time. At that point in time, this system, this framework will be really helpful to demonstrate that why there was a delay. Moving ahead, and this is the heart of the subject, which is the alterations in para A and para B of the Schedule 3. These are few tricky ones which we have picked up. This is not exhaustive in nature, but just to spell out some intricacies on each of this point. On acquisition front, there is one clarity which has been provided that any incorporation going forward, whether by me or by my subsidiary, would warrant disclosure. If I'm going to have more than 5% stake in that particular company. Another addition in this is they have, in case of transactions wherein for the first time, say if I'm acquiring 4% stake in a particular company, as per the current version of this regulation, we do not need to disclose because it is less than 5%. However, if the cost of acquisition is more than the threshold which is prescribed, which is that 2 to 5%, then despite being it less than 5%, I would now be required to make a disclosure. That's the second addition in acquisition definition list. Sale or disposal, there is new concept which has been introduced wherein the regulator is expecting us to disclose whenever my wholly owned subsidiary or associate company relinquishes its respective status. So for example, if I am holding 100% stake in a particular company, and if I go down to say 99%, okay, in the current version, we are not supposed to disclose because the variation is not more than 2% of the paid up capital. However, with this new version, even the change is less than 2%, but since that status of wholly owned subsidiary is going out, Therefore, we will be required to make a disclosure. This will hold true for subsidiary as well as associate companies. So, for example, if I am holding stake of say 51% and I dilute my stake and I go down 5%, since the variation is not more than 2%, still I will not require to disclose under the existing version. But in the new version, since the company is no longer going to be my subsidiary, therefore I will be required to be disclosing it out. Same goes for associate company. I am holding 20% stake and now I am going to 19.99. I will be required to be disclosing it. This again at the time of board approval, as well as when the definitive agreement gets signed, as well as when the actual transaction gets completed as part of the material update. Next point will be new rating. We know for now that up till now only change in rating views was supposed to be disclosed. Now every new rating which is obtained by the company is to be disclosed. This is especially this would become very cumbersome for companies like for a finance company who very frequently obtains loan and gives loan to many other persons because they keep on raising funds through debt, and many companies have a process for each debt they obtain a fresh rating. So that system will have to be revisited, and probably just like we have in INCS, wherein we have a shelf prospectus like concept, wherein through a prospectus we keep on raising funds. Similarly, we will have to take one umbrella rating, and whenever and under that umbrella rating we keep on raising funds. So in order to avoid multiple disclosures at multiple occasions. Next example would be change in senior management. As I had highlighted earlier, since the language is changed, this would not only include additions and deletions, which means recruitments and resignation approvals, but also promotions and demotions for that matter. And therefore, here the HR team will be will play a key role. And whenever there is change, that change has to be reported to stock exchange. Unavailability of MD CEO. The concept is that in a rolling period of 90 days, if 45 days MD or CEO is not available as is available regularly to perform regular work, then this disclosure has to be made. 2 points which are very important here is rolling period of 90 days. So it is not about a calendar quarter, it is about a rolling period. So that can be Feb to Feb, March, April, that can be Feb to April, that can be 15th February to 15th of May as well. So any rolling period of 90 days, if the MD or CEO is not available, then this disclosure will be warranted. Usually unavailability would be because of some serious illness, wherein he or she is not able to perform their duties. Work from home policy is already there. So anyone who is doing work from home, I don't think so that would be classified as unavailability of MD CEO. Announcement on social media by directors, SMP, KMPs. So now if any SMP, KMP director is making disclosure on their actual accounts, okay, and if that information is material, which is not yet disclosed to stock exchange, that has to be disclosed immediately, which is not later than 24 hours to stock exchange by the listed entities. Many companies have adopted a process wherein they have proactively asking a pre-clearance from the communications team and the secretary team for any posting done by director, KMP, SMP, so that they proactively take care of these kind of disclosures. Moving ahead, and now these two are very, very critical items. Action initiated or orders passed. Let's take a pause and very easily let's try to understand. They talk about 4 parts. One is any regulatory, statutory, enforcement authority, any judicial authority. If they are initiating or they have passed an order against the company or against the director, SMP, KMP in respect of the listed entity, which is confined to three things. One is search or seizure, opening of books of accounts under section 130, and investigation under chapter 14 of the Companies Act. Now, last two is not that significant and not very frequent. However, when it comes to search or seizure, that's a bit more frequent comparatively, and that's more frequent in the case of, if I have to give you examples, in case of income tax, GST, pollution control boards. For financial industry, it can be your PMLA authority. They often come, they visit, and I'm not talking about inspection in particular, I'm talking about proper search or seizure notice, wherein they come, they visit the premise and they confiscate certain documents. So this kind of action which is initiated, the outcome is not relevant. How many documents they have confiscated, whether they have confiscated, whether they have not confiscated, they got something, they didn't get something, there is going to be impact, there is not going to be an impact. All of those are irrelevant. All the very fact that this search or seizure operation has been taken place, that has to be disclosed. There are specifications provided as to what all information has to be disclosed. In that, I believe one of the item is what is the impact of such operation. So there, the company can give clarity as to what is the possible impact of it. Moving ahead, which is again one notch ahead, which talks about action taken or order passed. Again, the same four aspects: regulation, enforcement, and judicial authority against the listed entity or for key personnel in respect of listed entity. And then the consequence in respect of following. Then they have given a consequence. The most serious of them is, and most frequent of which is, penalty or fine. Now, just to give some good thing about it, that no administrative fees, if ROC fees is, if any ROC form is being filed and there is an additional fees, that need not be disclosed over here. However, if we have filed any return in delay with stock exchange and there is a penalty under SOP, that would be required. That would require disclosure. If I have to go more serious, say income tax, GST, usually you have an income tax, you have an assessment order. In GST, you have a scrutiny order. In that order, usually there is a demand, but that demand is also coupled with interest and penalty many a times. No matter how insignificant that demand is or that penalty is, no matter how frivolous that particular order is, but still we will be required to be disclosing it. Another example which I can give you is of, say, especially in case of finance industry, RBI is a very active regulator. For SEBI regulated entities, stockbrokers and mutual funds and all those. Again, SEBI is a very active regulator wherein there is regular inspection and there is regular penalty which is being levied or fines which are levied. All such disclosures, all such penalties and fines would be required to be disclosed. There is another fallout effect of this. As a company secretary under section 205, we submit to the board about compliance of all applicable laws. Secretarial auditor also confirms in its MR3 that there is system available for compliance of all applicable laws. If there is a company who is frequently making these kind of disclosures to stock exchange, all those questions, the question will be raised on the systems which are prevalent, and they would have to factor in before commenting on this particular aspect. Moving ahead, voluntary revision of financial statement, I think so it's not that frequent. Agreements under 5A, I have a different slide for it, which I will come to it subsequently. Arrangements for strategic, technical, manufacturing or marketing tie-up. Now this is very critical. These are certain terminologies or technical aspects which we as a secretarial team might not be so hands-on on. In fact, the business team is more hands-on on this particular aspect because they live it day in, day out. And therefore, as a company secretary, we will have to discuss with them about these subjects. Say for an NBFC or a bank, you would have a tie-up with NBFC or a bank for arranging funds for a credit card. There can be a tie-up arrangement between a vendor who is going to market. Okay. There is going to be a strategic nature of MOU which is being executed, that we both will come together and do some research or implement a particular project in ABC geography. There can be a technological collaboration wherein I take a technology and equipment from outside, and the other person or the counterpart is going to also give us a training in that respect. So that can be a technical collaboration. Arrangement for manufacturing, we all know how common this terminology is. My submission is that all these subjects has to be discussed with the business team, and we need to understand that which of all these items would fall under this para B and which would not fall under para B of this particular aspect. Another side to this coin is also, how do I assess, given that there is a quantitative threshold now, which is of 2 to 5%, how would I assess that this tie-up or this arrangement is forming under para B of point number 2? So this is a question which has to be answered, and again, an answer to this has to be brought in the policy or in an internal document. We usually say there is a left-hand side, right-hand side subject, wherein if my maturity threshold is 5 crores, then what would be the value which I will take up for these kind of arrangements? Will it be the prospective value which I would be earning out of this particular arrangement, or will it be the cost involved in this kind of arrangement, or the cost which I am committing in this kind of arrangement? Such kind of questions which needs to be framed, needs to be deliberated and concluded upon, and if possible, be made part of the policy which is being put on the public domain. Same goes for adoption of new line of business or closure of operation of any unit or division. Closure of operation of any unit or division is comparatively simple, because there you have historic value available of turnover and profit with you guys. But as far as adoption of new line of business, again, will it be cost or will it be profit? That is something which has to be understood. Moving ahead on pendency of any litigation. The language is pendency of any litigation or dispute for that matter. And there is a transition provision which says that by 12th of August, if there is any item which is falling under para B, that has to be disclosed. Often question comes to our desk that do I have to take that list of litigation dispute or the arrangements from 1st April? Should I take it from 14 June? Or should I take it from 5 years back? Or should I take it from 10 years back? Our submission is that whatever is live as on 14 July, which is not already available in public domain, that has to be disclosed to public at large. So irrespective whether it was executed before 14 June, after 14 June, it will have no relevance. The fact that it is live, it is outstanding as on 14th of July will be the criteria for making this kind of declaration or disclosure for that matter. Another aspect on this particular subject is the value which we have to take. For example, we all know that if a person makes any claim, we all have this experience wherein, say, the value would be 10 crores or 20 crores, but the claim is usually very tall. It would be 2x or 3x or sometimes 5x the actual claim value, which is the real value of it. So as a company, the question comes is, should I take the claim value or should I assess the value and see whether I have to, whether it is meeting the threshold or it is beating the threshold specified by the lawmaker. Our submission is to assess the value and then see whether it is beating the threshold or not. Last aspect which I would like to take on this para A is point number 5A, which is again fairly complicated in nature. 5A is again a very purpose regular point, as I often say. If I try to simplify it, it has 4 pockets. Anything which is going to impact the management, anything which is going to impact the control, anything which is going to impose any restriction, or anything which is going to create any liability on the listed entity, then that has to be disclosed. This is the first part. Second part is anyone, even if the listed entity is party to such agreement or not, if the promoter or any shareholder is a party to it, if the director is a party to it, if a KMP is a party to it, if SMP is a party to it, if subsidiary is a party to it, irrespective, if there is an implication on either of the 4 of these subjects, then it has to be disclosed. Now, we all know for a fact that management and control are concepts which are already governed and regulated under takeover code. So question comes as to what more is the regulator trying to understand and wants us to disclose. Over a period of time, there has been some improvisations. Like for example, NDTV case wherein the promoter entity issued convertible securities, which eventually led to change in management and control. Since it was a convertible security, therefore takeover code didn't get triggered, open offer didn't get triggered. But since that had impact on the management control, since eventually the management control changed, therefore as a public shareholder or as a shareholder, I should know that such kind of arrangements have been executed. So from that context, this particular provision has come. Another example can be separation agreements, family settlement agreements, which is executed by the promoters. Up till now, companies have been taking a call that since I am not a party to this agreement and therefore I do not warrant any disclosure. Now with this current version of this point number 5A, irrespective whether listed entity is a party or not, if the parent or the promoter has executed such of contracts, that would require a disclosure. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is Mr. A and Mr. B, who have 2 listed companies, DEF and XYZ. Okay. Suppose Mr. A and Mr. B enters into an agreement wherein they agree that Mr. A will take care of ABC and Mr. A will take care of DEF and Mr. B will take care of XYZ. This kind of arrangement has an impact on the management of the company. This will warrant disclosure going forward. Now, as a listed entity, as a secretary team or a compliance team, a question would come that how in the world would I know if I am not a party to this agreement? Many companies have started revisiting the declarations which they obtain from the listed companies. Many companies have started engaging with the family offices of the promoter and have a discussion on this particular front, that whether there is any arrangement which is going to impact the management or control. Friends, some calls are being taken by many companies that since I am not a party to this agreement and that's a call which the promoter is taking, if they do not want to disclose, then why should I disclose? Practically, many a times the compliance officers are part of the discussion when these agreements are being formulated in one way or the other. And therefore, as a compliance officer, our position will become very weak if we are not making this kind of disclosure. Last point on management control is that there is no exception of normal course, not normal course, because it has direct impact on management and control, and therefore there is no rider, no escape route provided to this particular aspect. On the right hand side, they have said that in any agreement which is executed by the listed entity, key personnel, subsidiary, promoter, shareholder, which is imposing any restriction of the liability, that would warrant disclosure. Now, thankfully, they have given exception of what is of normal course of business. So, for example, if I am incorporating a subsidiary and ABC business is given to the subsidiary, since this is in normal course of business, therefore it would, despite this being a restriction for me, I will not be required to disclose. However, just imagine you are selling off one of the listed, one of your subsidiary, and that in that arrangement you are entering into a non-compete clause. When I say you means a listed entity. If a listed entity is entering into a non-compete clause and saying that I will not do ABC business for XYZ years, is this a normal course of business? I don't think so. And therefore, such kind of clauses, along with our para A disclosures, we will have to make disclosure under point 5A as well. Friends, this will also hold true when our promoters are entering into such kind of arrangement, wherein they are selling XYZ business which is not even belonging to our group, but from a promoter group level. And wherein promoter is saying that I will not perform this XYZ business for next 3 years or 5 years, which would include the listed entity as well. Because the language is crafted in such a fashion that directly or potentially is going to whose purpose and effect is to impose any restriction other than in normal course of business, whether listed entity is party to such arrangement or not. So such kind of disclosures is something which will be coming into play. Now point number 4 is very, very critical. Usually we give guarantee securities for, or even we give loan to our, for the purpose of our subsidiary company, and which is pretty much in my normal course of business. However, if I am giving loan or giving guarantee or security to my promoter group entity, will that be considered as normal course of business? I doubt. Despite the fact, even if I receive guarantee fees, I still doubt whether that will be considered as normal course of business, because I am not in the business of providing financial services. I may be a manufacturing entity, I may be a service entity, and therefore this kind of arrangement would also by default warrant disclosure. We will move ahead. So if we see this para 5A, we see this all para A, para B items, I'm sure you would have by far realized that this compliance, as Makaran sir was also highlighting, that this compliance or these kind of disclosures will be impossible if this is left to the responsibility of company secretary or secretary team alone. This process the entire compliance of regulation 30 has to be democratized, has to be followed to the T. There has to be very serious amount of training and sensitization programs which many companies will be required to do. We move ahead. Now the million-dollar questions: what kind of changes are expected in the materiality policy? Usually any policy would start with some English which is about objective, philosophy, purpose. That has to be revisited. Para A, para B has to be updated. The threshold, quantitative threshold, which has come 2 to 5%, has to be updated. Assistance for employees, again, which we discussed about those 4 aspects: department, mode, reporting format, and when the disclosure has to be forming part of the policy in some way or the other. There can be much, we can even improvise further. We discussed about 30 sub-regulation 9, which is about subsidiary companies, event or information which are material. You may make it form part of the materiality policy, and even 30 sub-regulation 12 for that matter, which is items or events beyond 30 sub-regulation, beyond para A and para B. So these kind of changes are to be made in materiality policy. Again, question comes to our desk: should we do it by 14 July Should we do it? Can we do it afterwards? Our submission is we should do it as early as possible within the first board meeting, which is happening immediately after this regulation coming notified. We should be adopting this particular policy. Many companies would not want to do it by circular resolution because this is a big change which would require deliberation as well. Friends, if we talk about Regulation 30 and we do not talk about UPSI, it would be incomplete. Very quickly, even as Makaran sir was highlighting, that there is already a consultation paper. There were two consultation papers. One was Regulation 30, which they have already delivered in the form of second amendment. Another consultation paper is on UPSI, which is being discussed, and we may come to know one fine day that it has been also notified. The point here is that up till now, if we see the trend, SEBI has been taking a view that each Reg 30 item is by default a UPSI. As a mechanism, usually SEBI works backward from end to start, as in they first find an unusual transaction, then they see whether there is any material event or information which was disclosed revolving around it, okay, or was it in existence at the time when the trade was taken. If the answer is yes, naturally the price would, they see that there is a price volatility, and they question the company that, look, there is Mr. A, or they question the person that you have traded when you were in possession of UPSI. Please explain why we should not take action against you. There is another side to this, wherein we have already seen in the consultation paper there were around 1100 press releases which SEBI had analyzed, out of which 225 around they could conclude that the variation was more than 2% at the adjusted price, and all of them, more than 200, were actually UPSI in nature, and still basis that they were concluding that all press releases are UPSI by de facto. Therefore, now with this new version of Regulation 30, with this new version where each piece of information will be going within 30 minutes, 12 hours, and 24 hours, this enhanced form of disclosure, whether all items will be considered as UPSI. Though I am also of the view that change in items like change in RTA or schedule of analyst investor meet cannot be considered as UPSI, but there are many other items like change in SMP or these penalty items, which if there is a price volatility, SEBI would by default consider that as a UPSI. Going with this assumption that they may again include the reference of Regulation 30 in the UPSI definition, given the background that there is already a press release which they have, they are harping upon the press releases, they are giving a close watch on press releases, and they are considering each press release as UPSI, which is disclosed under the Regulation 30 tab of Stock Exchange. It would be not unfair to say that SEBI would consider each Reg 30 item also as UPSI, or most of the items as UPSI. And therefore, friends, when we say what is UPSI, or when we say that there is a UPSI in place, four things which immediately comes to our mind is making entry in SDD, closing the trading window for the relevant people, giving confidentiality notice, and thereafter tracking of trades. Now, if we read this Regulation 30 Schedule 3 para along with this UPSI, or we read this Schedule 3 items through the lens of UPSI, one aspect which comes out very loudly is listed companies will have to focus on start date more. In the sense, let's take an example. Suppose there is a resignation given by KMP or SMP. Usually the person of such stature, they have some discussion and then they actually put down the papers. The moment they put down the papers, they put it on record, that's when the UPSI would start. as SEBI has given us UPSI definition or UPSI germination definition which they have given, the possibility of an event or information happening is more than not happening. That is what SEBI considered as UPSI germination. So the moment a resignation is tendered, despite the fact that that resignation can be taken back, since the possibility of that person disassociating eventually is more, therefore that would be considered as the start point of UPSI. That's when the trading window has to close, that's where the confidential notice has to be given, that's where SDD entries have to be made. However, the disclosure will be made only when it is effective or when the resignation is finalized. Therefore, if as a secretary team or as a compliance team, you would want these kind of disclosures twice. If you are maintaining SDD, then you would want information twice. Once when the UPSI is germinated and once when it has reached to finality for disclosure. Friends, this is again high time given the volume which we all are envisaging that there will be truckload of information which will go to public domain. Therefore, this is again high time. If we have already not democratized this process of making SDD entries, we should be democratizing it very, very soon. Another example which can be taken is of, say, litigation. The moment you receive the case papers or the notice, that's when you assess what is the impact. The moment the assessment is complete, that yes, this is going to impact us more, that's when the UPSI would start. Again, that's when the trading window will close, that's when confidentiality notice and SDD entries will be made. And the moment that assessment is complete, from the moment the assessment is complete till the time of disclosure, it will be classified as UPSI. The moment you disclose, till 48 hours, you are not allowed to trade anyways. The moment we disclose, that's when the UPSI would end. Another example would be of credit rating. I have just taken 3-4 examples. I'm not going to take for each item. Credit rating, usually there is a rating process wherein the rating agency is engaged and then papers are shared, analysis is done. Thereafter, the rating agency gives a draft rating letter to the finance team or project team, whoever is taking that lead. The moment the draft letter is received, since there is now a concept of new rating as well as revision rating, in each of the case, the UPSI will be germinated the time when the draft rating letter is received. Naturally, from then on, the UPSI will start, the trading window will be closed, confidential notice, SDD entries. The moment the final rating letter is received and you make a disclosure to stock exchange, that's when this UPSI will end. So friends, as you are observing, I think so I can skip this acquisition part and bonus issue part. The message is very clear, I believe, my friends. And therefore, given the context that there are so many things to be done, or para A, para B items, there is so much to be shared with the key personnel for in UPSI front. There are a lot of training exercises, lot of sensitization exercises, lot of health checks from time on time which has to be done to ensure that the system is in place. Friends, this was all about Regulation 30 and bit of a flavor of UPSR. Now we will quickly take other items and then we will go to Q&A. If you have already not posted your queries, please post your queries. Happy to take it up. One concept which they have come out with is sale, lease or otherwise dispose of. We all know 181A resolution which are getting passed. There is now 3 conditions which SEBI has prescribed, wherein they are saying special resolution will be required, commercial reasons had to be given, and last but not the least, the most critical of it, wherein majority of minority, which means the public shareholders needs to cast vote in favor of the particular proposition. If they do not do that, and even if your special resolution is passed, still the resolution or still the motion will be considered to be not passed. And therefore, it will become very important to engage with all other public shareholders and in order to get the resolution passed. There is only one exception wherein they are saying that if it is passed to a wholly owned subsidiary, then you would not require prior approval of shareholders. However, prior approval of shareholders would be warranted still whenever we dilute our stake in such wholly owned subsidiaries. Say from 100 we go to 99 or 98, irrespective whether it is a third party or it is out of ESOP allotment. The moment from 100 to we go to 99.99, which means we dilute, we will have to take a prior approval of the shareholders, and again with the same conditionality, wherein majority of the minority approval will also be warranted. Further, even if we sell, lease or otherwise dispose of, which means even if we create any kind of encumbrance on those particular assets which we have got from the holding listed company, still we will have to go on through this particular mechanism. There seems to be one escape route, since this is other than scheme of arrangement. Therefore, this kind of process or this kind of endless kind of monitoring required. Many companies would now start looking after going through sale of undertaking through merger through NCLT route, which is slump sale route. If we go through that, then probably this regulation would not be applicable, or this restriction would not be applicable. Casual vacancy, as we know now, they have said that for each of these key positions, which is MD, CEO, WTD, CFO, there is a period of 3 months within which the position has to be filled. So technically, if you have a 3 months notice period, so the timeline would be 3 plus 3, which is 6 months, which you would be having to fill that particular vacancy. There is also some English which is used in for interim capacity. Vacancy shall not be filled by a person in interim capacity, and if it is being filled, the person should be eligible to meet that particular requirement of the position. The whole idea being that they're not saying that you do not fill this particular vacancy for interim period. What they are trying to highlight is that whoever is filling, he has to own that position, own the responsibility of that particular position, has to be eligible for that particular position. Say if a CS has stepped down, then the person who is getting appointed in CS position needs to be a member of ICSI for sure. We move ahead. Continuation of director. So this is coming out very loudly that if other than these directors, if there is any director who is sitting in a board who has not been subject to shareholders approval for more than 5 years, then their position will have to be taken up immediately in the next general meeting. This would not impact many companies. This would come especially for positions like chairman emeritus, who hold such fiduciary positions and are not even executive directors for that matter, or for promoter non-executive directors who are enjoying a permanent board seat and not liable to retirement by rotation. Apart from that, we don't foresee that this is going to impact much. Investor meet, very quickly and very clearly now they have specified that at least 2 clear working days in advance this particular intimation has to be given. As we know, investor meets can be bifurcated into 3 parts. One is post-earning call, one is group meeting, and third is one-to-one meetings. So one-to-one meeting, this is not applicable. This is applicable to group meetings and post-earning calls only. Again, there is another food for thought. If we see this regulation 30, it says that information which is event or information which is germinating, it has within the company, it has to be intimated within 12 hours. So if the schedule of the investor call is fixed, say 7 days before, okay, should I intimate from 12 hours from the previous 7th day, or should I disclose it only in 2 working days in advance? This is a food for thought for everyone, my friends. If you have any questions, please write back in the Q&A section. Cybersecurity, this is another subject which they have tried to introduce. Their submission in the amendment is that any cybersecurity incident, any cybersecurity breach, any loss of data or document needs to be intimated to stock exchange in the quarterly corporate governance report. Now the challenge here is, my friends, cyber security incident and cyber security breach, these are defined terminologies under the CERT guidelines. If we see that definition, that definition is very, very wide. In fact, the format also with the consultation paper provides, which was suggested, they also expect the compliance status of the CERT guidelines as well. And therefore one will have to speak with IT department and try to get more and more clarity as to what has to be, what will get covered under this and what will not get covered under this, and lay down systems revolving around that. More importantly, this language, loss of data or documents, which is not directly correlated with cybersecurity or IT for that matter, is coming very differently from cybersecurity incident and cybersecurity breach. Therefore, one interpretation is being emanating that is it about any loss of data or document? So, for example, if my office boy leaves with an executed document and during the journey he misses that document or loses that document, will that be required to be reported? I think so. We will have to wait for this format to come to get more clarity, or the continuous disclosure requirement circular, which is going to come for particular clarity. Moving ahead, BRSR amendments. This is already effective, guys. However, the circulars are awaited. There is an introduction of concept of BRSR core, which is made applicable to top 150 companies and which is gradually going to get applicable to top 1000 listed companies. And also for value chain items, BISR core is being made applicable. This is being made applicable to top 250 companies. This BRSR core is basically from KPIs. They are going to specify certain KPIs wherein company or the regulator expects certain amount of assurance that these targets will be met, or this will happen within the specified time. How, what, it will be coming in due course of time. Moving ahead, rumor amendment, which has come, which is applicable to top 100 companies from October 23, which is roughly around 3 odd months from now, and top 250 companies with effect from 1st April 24. Based on our dialogues with many listed companies, we understand that there is no specific vendor who is able to provide searchable data for more than probably 25,000 newspapers and more than 1,000 news channels. In fact, they have gone to an extent of foreign newspapers as well, digital media as well, and to make our life more difficult, it is an inclusive definition. So what do? Already many companies have a system prevalent wherein already communication team is tracking data. First thing is whether there is any other vendor who is providing such kind of searchable database is something which has to be looked after, and on a best effort basis, whatever is available, that has to be compiled and that has to be verified. As far as verification process is concerned, we believe that it can be sliced into 2-3 parts. One is what is not rumor that can be moved out, which means that what we have not already disclosed that can be eliminated, what we have already disclosed that can be eliminated. What is not disclosed, out of that again, which ones are material in nature, that has to be identified. With the ones which are not material in nature, that can be eliminated, and the ones which are material in nature, that has to be clarified. As far as confirm, deny, or clarify is concerned, let's say for an example, if we are if the company is exploring an option for acquisition of a particular target company, and the news is already out in public domain, as a company, I would have to proactively, up till now, many stock exchange used to issue us a letter saying that, look, we have found this in media, please clarify your position. Or they used to say that there is a lot of volatility in your price, or there is spot in volume, please clarify. Now, suo moto, companies will have to identify the reasoning through the mainstream media. If there is any rumor which is going out, they have to clarify. Say if I deny, say if I am in a particular situation wherein I have signed an MOU and the due diligence is going on, I will not be in a position to deny that particular information. I will have to confirm that yes, we are being pursuing. Many companies would have a generic language, as in we keep on exploring, we are also exploring this, but there is no definitive agreement which has been signed. We will keep on intimating as soon as the information becomes credible and concrete for disclosure. So such kind of disclosures would be, well, such kind of clarification is what would be required. Last but not the least, I believe changes in annual report, changes in SMP and key agreements, as we discussed under point 5A of para A, has to be disclosed in annual report. Often question comes to our desk if my annual report is getting approved after 13th of July, should I disclose? The answer would be yes. This kind of information is not wherein we will have to do certain amount of process and then comply. Process with respect to change in SMP is already in place under Companies and under LODR both. For point 5A, again, it is a matter of disclosure, which would already be there on 14 July, which you will have to disclose if there is any such kind of agreement already in public domain. So there is no separate exercise which has to be done. If your annual report is getting approved after 13 July, which is 14 July onwards, then this disclosure is warranted. I think so, guys. This is about it from my side. Happy to take questions.
Hello, sir. As there are a lot of queries, I will just read the questions for your reference. So one of the questions is that ongoing events needs to be informed in 30 days. Will incorporation of subsidiary, which was done earlier, will need to be informed now after this notification?
So if you are incorporation of a subsidiary which is already incorporated, will it be required to disclose? So if you have March 23 financials would already be out, I think so that would already cover your AOC one. If your annual report is already out, that would already be in public domain. If it is not in public domain already, such kind of incorporation, that would be required to be disclosed as one school of thought. My submission is that we will be required to be disclosing it.
So one more question is regarding that whether how the materiality policy will identify the how will identify the relevant employees and how will the policy assist it. But I understand that has been answered. So if you would like to add something on these two questions, whether.
So I think so. We discussed this at length about how this assistance will happen. A question I believe would be, who is this relevant employee? Okay. If we see SEBI discussion paper and the board note, they want this relevant employee concept go to the lowest level possible. So my submission will not be to try to come out with some top management people. This should be passed on. How much we have to discuss, whether it should be in the form of a literature or whether it will be in the form of sensitization. That distinction which we can make while we are doing the sensitization program. But as a document, we should not confine ourselves to the top management.
Thank you, sir. So the other question goes this way. If the company appoints interim CS as full-time KMP under section 203, and is made responsible for all the duties and responsibilities, is that in compliance with Regulation 6 of SEBI LODR?
Definitely. So the only, I think so, I'm just rephrasing or being more specific about it. So if the company secretary is a member of ICS and is being appointed as compliance officer under Regulation 6, then that is a good enough compliance.
Okay, sir. Another question is, some disclosure about after board meeting is required to be made in 30 minutes. But what if the board resolution is not acted upon, and as a result, the definitive agreements are not executed? Then the board meeting's base disclosure would become unnecessary market trigger.
Absolutely, that's there in any case, and even SEBI has considered that, and that whether that resolution being acted upon or not, that will come as a material update subsequently. So I don't see a reason why that should be a factor to not disclose as of now.
So one question is regarding pursuant to this amendment, action taken or orders passed by any statutory authority against the listed entity or subsidiary needs to be intimated to stock exchange, which also covers warning or caution letters. So what type of warning letters or caution letters would be covered?
Good question. Actually, I missed it in my talk. To give you an example, for the finance industry, for NBFC, RBI gives inspects and gives the report very frequently. In their inspection report, if after the observations, if they write, okay, that if you fail to comply, then we will take action against you. Okay, is that a warning? Where I'm also coming from is in the literature also, if you observe, warning or caution is coming as one point. There is another point which says or any other action. I believe that's the language which is coming up. Yeah, it's saying that any other similar action by whatever name called, right? So my submission would be that, say, for a manufacturing unit, there is factory inspector who comes on visit frequently. For a financial regulator, SEBI or RBI comes frequently visiting on the doors. Wherever there are such inspection reports which comes on, even for pharma companies or hospitality industry, FDA comes into play. Wherever we have such kind of reports which are getting generated, we will have to see the language, what kind of submissions are being made or what kind of is being made to the listed basis, that we will have to assess whether it will come in warning or caution or any other similar action as why whatever name called.
Thank you. So another question is for ratings, new ratings. Should we consider only credit ratings or any other ratings such as ESG rating, etc.?
So we will have to wait for that continuous requirement, disclosure requirement circular. Probably that will give us some guidance. Up till now, industry has been practicing only with respect to credit rating, is my observation. But yes, this anomaly is there. We will have to wait for some while to get more clarity.
Okay, sir. There's one more question for normal course of business. Is disclosure for signing franchisee agreement is considered as signed in normal course of business?
So this normal course of business is appearing in para B point 4 and 5, which talks about awarding or bagging of contracts or orders, and point number 5, which talks about any agreement which is not in normal course of business. My submission would be to draft parameters revolving around what we will close as normal course of business, what we will not call as normal course of business. There have been some judgments revolving around it already. So value, repetitiveness, arm's length, consonance with the object laws of the company are few of the parameters which can be taken into consideration. Say, for example, companies like, I believe, Sapphire Foods, which has KFC kind of a model. Okay. Their entry into a franchisee agreement would be very, very common. Even for a retailer, there can be retail store outlet franchisee model will be very, very common. The size would also be important. Say in a year, if I am executing 10 franchisee agreements, but now in this particular year, I am going for 20 or 25 or 30 kind of franchisee agreements. That is definitely going to be material, is my submission, and that will naturally not be a normal course of business.
Okay, sir. Another question is whether there's any effect on events happened before 13 July, like pendency of any matter like litigation, etc.
Definitely. So, since the example which is quoted is of litigation or dispute, let me take that example. So, if there is any litigation or dispute which is outstanding, which is already being running in any relevant court or arbitration or wherever, we will have to assess the value of that, and if the value is going to be beyond that particular threshold, that will have to be disclosed. Friends, it is not only about point number A. The entire items which are coming in para number B, we will have to strictly revisit that particular list and see which of them are still outstanding, which is yet to be disclosed as per the 2 to 5% parameter. My hunch is many companies will be giving a long list of disclosures on from 14th of July till 12th of August.
Sir, in just connection to the same, there's one question whether we have to take cumulative order passed by authority or individual orders to be taken during such particular period.
Individual. My submission again would be to document it.
Okay, sir. One question is to how to quantify or determine significant market reaction under Regulation 30.
Very difficult. Very, very difficult. One can assess based on history. In fact, why should I put it? Let me put it this way: there have been judgment wherein SEBI itself has stated that the impact on price depends of multiple of factors which may or may not be within the control of the listed entity, and giving a quantitative threshold to that will be very, very difficult. However, at the same point in time, whenever any event or information comes to your desk, assess whether this is critical or not based on some already publicly available data. If there has been similar incidents for other companies, whether there was any comparable companies, what was the impact, and document that kind of working would be my submission.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Another question is this way: fine imposed by stock exchange under SOP circular for some non-compliances for which the company is in process to make a waiver application. Is it still required to disclose the same to stock exchange under Regulation 30?
So, if my memory serves me correct, the SOP penalty circular which was come in has quoted Regulation 98 and also certain provisions of SEBI SCRA in that particular circular, which actually gives power to stock exchange to levy and collect penalties. And since this is penalty, and since in a way stock exchange is an enforcement authority, therefore such disclosures is warranted.
Sir, another question is, company lending to subsidiary will be treated as a normal course of business or not?
Subsidiary, on the face of it, definitely. But if promoter stakes are also involved personally, maybe.
Okay. The another question is the intimation of resignation to be communicated at the time of tendering the resignation or the determination of last working day.
So there are two aspects to it. If we see that point number 7, I guess, it talks about change in director, KMP, SMP, and then there is SA 7A, 7B, 7C, 7D. in all of it says that the resignation letter has to be submitted within 7 days of the effectiveness of that particular resignation. So the letter will definitely go afterwards. The disclosure with respect to resignation would go when that particular resignation is finite, is what I would say. Now there is a subjectivity angle also here, but let me give some examples. For such designations, usually this kind of resignation is placed before NRC board as well. So the moment that happens, they have given their blessing, it becomes finite. Another angle is where SMP would have accepted the offer letter at the other side, okay, and they would also be making a disclosure to that effect. That can be another finite stage. Friends, the very point here is that if we do not give that disclosure, and for some XYZ reason, maybe the entity where he or she is getting appointed, they make a disclosure, or there is a leak in the media that this SMP is going out. If that kind of disclosure comes in the market, which is not triggered by the company, then that will be a worrisome situation. And therefore, we need to have some structure wherein when the resignation becomes finite, that has to be disclosed.
Thank you, sir. So whether the transaction is between two listed entities where one is dependent on the board approval of the other company, there will be the first company disclose the approval within 30 minutes, or it shall wait for the second company to approve them and then disclose. Should they plan the board meeting simultaneously, or how to deal with this practical difficulty?
Try to plan it together, and if it is of such critical importance, then don't wait for one board meeting to get over. Try to come out with the disclosure simultaneously or near about.
Okay, so another question, whether show cause notices are to be considered as regulatory authority orders or actions passed.
So show cause notice, to my mind, is wherein the regulator or enforcement agency is trying to get further information and asking us why we should not take actions against you. Okay. So to my mind, it is not an action taken or order passed.
So another question is termination of orders, contracts not in normal course of business are to be required to be disclosed or not. What would be considered as termination not in normal course of business?
So at the outset, if I have to make a disclosure, if I have to consider a disclosure under para B for term, be that as it may be, for entry into that kind of agreement also, I would have been required to make a disclosure. So if I have made disclosure at the time of entering, and if it is of that level, then this will come as a material update. So I would not like to go into that debate of whether it is in normal course or not normal course.
Okay, sir. So one question is related to policy, how to define emanating within the listed entity and vice versa in the policy.
Yes, I have covered in my talk that we can have a table. We need not stick to the English. Even if we stick to the English, we can have an internal document which can take care of all para A, para B items, just like the table which we have shown. Also, my submission would be that this circular is probably on its way, continuous disclosure requirement circular. That again, we can wait and we can take a resort to that.
Okay, sir. One more question. Currently, if someone gets covered under list of SMP due to organizational restructuring, she will no longer be covered under. However, he continues to be employee of the company. So, still any disclosure is required for the same?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So currently, if someone gets covered under SMP's definition, but due to organizational restructuring, he is no more the SMP, but actually continues to be the employee of the company. So still the disclosure is required or not?
Absolutely. Since the language is changed, as I said, that apart from addition, deletion, promotion, demotions, or any format of change would also be required to disclose.
Okay, sir. So one question regarding rumored. Often NDAs are signed regarding for a mergers, acquisitions, JV, etc.
Override the law. If the law prescribes that this has to be disclosed, it has to be disclosed. So law will override.
So what is the timeline for disclosure of subsisting agreements as on the date of...
Sorry, Harshita, let me complete that circle.
Yes.
Law will override definitely. However, if there is any specification, if I have entered into an NDA saying that if I am compelled by law to disclose, I will be making an intimation to you and then be disclosing. So all whatever process which I have agreed to in the agreement, that also has to be respected. That also has to be adhered. But that cannot be a hindrance or a hurdle or a no-goer for me to disclose.
Okay, sir. So one question regarding cybersecurity. This has been repeated number of times. For reporting of cybersecurity incidents, is any threshold need to be taken for consideration, or any type of cybersecurity incidents have to be reported?
No specification. Any cybersecurity incident or breach incident for now.
Okay, sir. So one query regarding annual report. If the annual report is approved and adopted by the board in May 23, which is almost done by all listed companies, do they have to add amendments made by Schedule 5 now in the annual report for financial year 2023?
Definitely not required.
Sir, I tried to combine few similar queries, and you so nicely have answered all the queries. Now I would like to the people who have raised their hands can just speak up their questions, and please go ahead with their queries. So Mr. Pradeep Bhandari, you can start with your query.
We will have to allow. That we will have to allow.
Yeah.
They can unmute themselves and speak.
Pradeep ji, you want to...
Yeah, good evening. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
I think, yes, changes have been elaborate, and thank you for the presentation. I have got only one simple question now. This 12 hours and 24 hours. So we will have to consider this as a working hours or what?
Unfortunately, sir, there is no rider of working hours. In fact, it was deliberated. This was many companies have given this comment. SEBI has commented stating that in this digital era, there is nothing working, non-working. It is strictly 12 hours, 24 hours. Their objective is that it should reach to the public as soon as possible. That's the legal framework. Practically, we have seen sometimes it comes with a certain amount of delay, wherein companies explain that this was why it was delayed. Sometimes it is taken positively and sometimes it is taken negatively. We have also seen some cases wherein there are quoted pronouncement for it, wherein since the disclosure was after 24 hours, owing to the lack of proper systems, SEBI was penalized. The listed entity was penalized for lack of framework.
Okay, thank you.
Ji. Gayatri madam, you want to raise some point? You can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Ji ma'am.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vandana. Do we need to give the disclosure of any LSF fees paid to RBI?
Can you elaborate on LSMPs? What is it?
If the company is paying LSF fees for any late filing, do the disclosure is required?
So the test will be, is the fees which you are paying administrative fees or is it a penalty or fine?
Fine.
Yeah. So if it is fine, then it has to be disclosed.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, we have been deliberating with a lot of banks, wherein 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 amount of fines are being levied for operational purposes. Given the version it is currently, it has to be disclosed unless there is some clarity which comes in the continuous disclosure requirements.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Yes. You're on mute, Yashika.
Hello.
Ji.
So if Ms. Sheetal Jain, if you would like to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. Thanks, Yashika. So I have a few queries.
Ji.
In case if there's a vacancy in KMP position before this came into these regulations came into effect, but as on 14th July we have crossed 3 months, but not the 6 months in totality. Will the vacancy has to be filled before 14 July? Like, will it be taken as retrospective?
Ma'am, I'm afraid this question only SEBI can answer. There is no specification provided. My submission would be do it ASAP. There are legal recourses which are available. To my mind, a stand can be taken the day this regulation comes into effect. From that day onwards, 3 months meter will start. But that's the legal stand which we can take. It has to be, that argument has to be one with the regulator.
Thank you for the answer, sir. I have few questions more. With respect to SMPs, the power is generally granted to NRC. So the disclosure has to be done post NRC meetings, because few items don't go to board. Like,
absolutely, yes. So if it is in the policy, if the policy is crafted in such a fashion that decision lies with the SMP, then with the NRC, then within 30 minutes from a conclusion of NRC.
Okay, sir. One last question with respect to cyber security. The disclosure has to be made on consolidated level. See, for example, if there's any cyber security issue with respect to subsidiary, which is not material or say material, then CGR of listed entity will have to disclose that too?
No, definitely not. So if it is pertaining to subsidiary, it will not come in CGR. However, if it is pertaining to subsidiary and it is material in your example, then it will come under Reg 30, sub-regulation.
And it is okay. That has to be material. So one last, just an understanding, not a question. There are few items in Regulation 30 which may not be categorized as UPSI. Is there any way out to identify which Regulation 30 in disclosures will lead to a closure of trading window? For example, just to give an example, resignation of SMP, will that also be considered as, will the listed company has to close the trading window as soon as the information is out? Or
there are two factors, madam. One is, in current version of UPSI definition, there is no reference of Reg 30. And the de facto, not each Reg 30 item will be UPSI is one way of looking at it. And there is 9A regulation to that effect in PIT regulation, which says that we need to have an internal system, control system, for process of identification of UPSI. So if you document what is UPSI, what is not UPSI through MD's desk, it can come. And that can be one reason why change in SMP would not be considered as UPSI, is one way of looking at it. Second way of looking at it is, and which is bit concerning, is since these kind of informations will be going to stock exchanges for the first time, we have yet not seen that how market reacts in such situations. And therefore, if I would have been you, I would have not tried to take that stand for now. I would have waited to see that how market reacts, how, at least for my SMPs or my peer my comparable companies, and then take a call. Till that point in time, conservatively, I would like to take it as a UPSI, because if God forbid, and if any person takes any position, or if SEBI questions us, now there is another school of thought I did mention in my talk. In my Regulation 30 disclosures, already there is a table which I have to fill, wherein I have to give details of trading window closure. And there is an NEC circular which is seeking feedback, wherein they are going to make it a routine practice for all Reg 30 items. So if that becomes so, then in my making submission under Reg 30 for change in SMP, you would also have to mention what was the trading window closure period. So given this context, worry is that we should take it as a UPSI and closed trading window for those limited people.
Sure. Thank you.
Ji.
I would request Mr. Dakshinamurthy Iyer to unmute yourself and ask questions.
Yeah, so I had a question in case of say closure of leased units or say any of the units where you're transferring your machinery to some other existing units and thereby there's no issue in supply of materials or your production is not basically hampered. So whether that would trigger a disclosure to the exchange because your views on that?
Sir, if the impact is not going to be material because of this shift, which is that 2 to 5%, then definitely not.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Ji.
I would request Ms. Darpita Palan to unmute herself.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Hi, Darpita.
Sir, I just had some 2 or 3 questions. So first thing is जो news जहाँ भी publish हो रहा है, so rumor verification basically. So how do we ascertain that in which newspapers in India or maybe outside India हमारी news कुछ publish हो रही है? Are there some PR agencies who can provide this kind of services or what can be the process for this?
There are already agencies which provide such kind of data. Okay. Your communications team would already know about it. If not, then they can, through their community, they can get it. We can also help you. But that would not be comprehensive is my apprehension because this mainstream media definition is quite wide. Okay. And probably not one vendor will be sufficient. We will need to have multiple vendors.
So we need to take their subscription.
Ji.
Okay. And the other thing is regarding the MD and CEO. So maybe if my MD and CEO is giving multiple interviews or some leadership team, maybe my marketing head, they are being interviewed by CNBC or any other news channels. So will that also attract the stock exchange intimation under mass communication?
So if that in that communication they pass on any material event or information which you have not already disclosed, the answer is yes.
Okay. And regarding the unavailability of MD, so if my MD is going on an official tour for first 30 days and returning from that official tour for the next 30 days, he is going for personal leave. Continuous 60 days, 30 days for official, 30 days for personal leave. So will this account as unavailability of MD and will this attract the stock exchange intimation?
Official tour as in holiday or official tour for visiting lot of stakeholders?
Maybe visiting stakeholders.
So that's not a leave. He's on work. He's working.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so last 3 attendees. One, Mrs. Ankita Malde, can you just unmute yourself?
Yeah, actually, I have one question related to materiality policy. Like in our materiality policy, we have mentioned that any amendment or subsequent modification will be applied automatically. So, is it required to amend the materiality policy?
So, very honestly, the 3 aspects, with 2 aspects, para A, para B, and the guidelines for materiality. These are natural. There we don't need to apply our mind. However, when it comes to objective of purpose and also when it comes to assistance of employees, wherein the policy should assist employees to identify, report about potential information, there I believe it will require wisdom of board to approve. And therefore it would not be safe to take a call that company secretary or anyone who is delegated can make that amendment on his own.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ashiva Pereira.
Yeah, so for like we have this continuing and discontinuing operations. So while calculating this materiality threshold, like the turnover, PAT and all, so that both should be taken into account, or it should be.
Good question, ma'am. So first thing is my right hand side, which is the threshold that is already set because it says lower of the following. So 2% of console turnover, 2% of console net worth, or 5% of average PAT of last 3 years, whichever is lower. So that number is freezed. There we do not have an option. However, on the left hand side, if we observe, we will have to, whatever is the scenario, say it is about discontinuing operation, then we will have to look at the turnover and then take a call. Probably PAT would not be a right figure to derive whether it is material or not. Turnover is something which has to be factored in.
So turnover will be for both continuing as well as discontinuing.
Ji.
And for net, PAT will be only for continuing, to say.
PAT would be only for turnover is what you have to look, is what I was saying in simple.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Again, ma'am, submission document this, please. This is the view which I have given is not something which is already slated in the law. This is a practice which is emerging amongst the industries, and this is a call which we are taking that has to be documented because this is as a rationale behind it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Rahul Deshpande. Okay, I think there's one person with a number 227592.
Yeah. Hi, Priyanka.
Hi,
Hi. So I had 3 to 4 queries. Starting off with, I just wanted clarification on disclosure of the CG report with respect to senior management. So what is the stand like? Do we disclose it in this June ending quarter, or it is effective from the September ending quarter? And also, my annual report has already been approved by the board in my previous meeting. So should I go back to the board for revision of my CG report, or this will be applicable from next year onwards?
So if your annual report is already approved, then you don't need to revisit it. It will be applicable from next year onwards. And with respect to change in SMP, it will be effective from 14 July. So any change on and after that will have to be reported immediately. It's not on quarter basis.
So my CG report, which I will publish now, that doesn't need to include SMP, correct?
I'm not pretty much aware of the CG format. The amendment is coming in Schedule 3, which means immediately upon change we have to intimate.
My next question is regarding the BRSR amendment. It talks about assurance from value chain partners. So I want a little more clarity on that. Like, how do we go about it practically?
So many companies have already proactively, they have been engaging consultants to handhold these value chain to comply with this BRSR norms. So the companies in consultation with consultants, they are asking them to go to the value chain, set targets, and take proper feedback, and which will help them in reporting.
And thank you. And my last question is regarding the materiality policy. Even in the changes of materiality policy, even in your slide, you spoke about assistance for employees. I want to understand what is the practical approach for that. Like, how do we go about, explaining our entire organization about the impact of, impact and the consequences of not meeting up with the materiality thresholds?
Lot of meetings, lot of trainings.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Saurabh sir, for patiently solving so many queries. Dear attendees, we try to solve majority of the queries. However, if there are queries which are pending or unaddressed, they can connect us personally. Further, I would like to express a heartfelt gratitude and extend a sincere vote of thanks on behalf of MMJC. We would like to express our deepest appreciation to all of those who have taken time to attend the webinar presented by our esteemed Saurabh sir. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Makran sir for his precious time, and Saurabh sir for his enlightening and thought-provoking webinar. Your in-depth analysis of Second Amendment and the insights shared during the session have undoubtedly enriched our understanding of this important regulatory framework. We would like to thank each one of your valuable time, participation, and commitment to the professional growth. Thank you once again, and we look forward to your continued participation in our future interviews.
Thank you, Yashika, for being a wonderful host. And thank you, Aarti, for arranging this for this session. Thank you, guys. All the best in complying with the LODR Second Amendment.